Welcome to Season 5 of the Agile Brand with Greg Kilstrom, where we talk with enterprise and technology platform leaders about the people, processes, and platforms that make marketing and customer experience successful, scalable, and sustainable. This is what creates an Agile brand. I'm your host, Greg Kilstrom, advisor and consultant for Fortune 1000 marketing and CX leaders and teams as principal and chief strategist at GK5A, and best-selling author, keynote speaker, entrepreneur, and Agile certified coach. The Agile Brand podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To sign up for the Agile Brand newsletter and get the latest insights and articles on marketing technology and CX, or to purchase a copy of my latest book, House of the Customer, go to gregkilstrom.com. You can also find all my books on Amazon and other retailers. And now on to the show. One quick note before we get started. I originally recorded this episode when I was a little bit under the weather, so please excuse my voice on this. Otherwise, I can't wait for you to listen. In December of 2022, digital marketers in the healthcare industry were impacted by an expanded definition of PHI, or personal health information, in the HIPAA, or the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act regulations, which are the federal law in the United States that protects sensitive patient health information from being disclosed. While this impacts healthcare companies in the US most specifically, and our conversation today is going to center around healthcare marketers, there are lessons to be learned here for marketers in any industry or locale where consumer data privacy is under increased scrutiny and regulations. Today, we're going to talk about creating a HIPAA-compliant marketing technology stack and how to not sacrifice marketing effectiveness while still protecting consumer data, in this case, personal health information. To help me discuss this topic, I'd like to welcome Ray Mina, head of marketing at Freshpaint. Ray, welcome to the show.
Hey, Greg. Thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, looking forward to talking about this with you. So why don't we get started with you giving a little background on yourself, and if you could talk a little bit about what Freshpaint does as background, that would help as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because I've been a marketer my entire career, but I've never worked in healthcare as a marketer. But I think what is unique about this moment is I have worked, I've been a part of at least 7 startups now where I've used a lot of the tools that healthcare marketers rely on, like Google Analytics and Facebook ads and Google ads. I've used those exact same tools to take startups from 0 to 60. And I can have a lot of understanding and empathy with what healthcare marketers are facing today. And I guess that gets into a little bit about what Freshpaint does. We're a healthcare privacy platform that helps those healthcare marketers that are leveraging consumer-facing advertising and analytics and even tools that improve website experience. They help them continue to leverage those tools, but do it in a way that is HIPAA compliant and doesn't run afoul of the regulators, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as those changes to the regulations came down, late last year, earlier this year, definitely affected a lot of healthcare marketers. And, I know many are still, even months later, still kind of scrambling to figure out what the best approach is. So let's start then by talking about some of those things that healthcare marketers should be thinking of differently, starting with the marketing stack itself. What's the best way to think about creating a HIPAA-compliant marketing stack, and where does an organization start?
Yeah, I think when you and I connected, you said something to me that really struck me. You said that it sounds like it requires a mind shift in the way that people are thinking about their marketing tech stack, and that's exactly right. Because up until the guidance, the OCR guidance that came, oh my gosh, we're looking almost a year ago now.
Right.
Healthcare was really concerned about privacy, but most organizations were thinking about privacy from a logged in state. So you've got data in your EHR, you've got data in your CRM, you've got data in a warehouse. Of course, that's all sensitive information that people are protecting. People are not thinking about, I've got a hospital website, and on that website, I've got anonymous visitors that haven't filled out any forms, haven't become patients yet. There was no consideration that that was something that they should be concerned about. And so that's been the biggest shift that's happened, is now suddenly healthcare teams, especially healthcare marketers that own the website for those organizations, they've been suddenly tasked with thinking about, oh my gosh, a visitor to my site that visits some specific information like pregnancy services is suddenly something that could, get me into trouble with regulators, and that's been a major mind shift change. Now, back in December of last year, that was like just chaos. People were like, "Oh
Right.
my God, I can't believe this could be true." It's come a long way, obviously. Now, people have had 10 to 12 months to start to like have these conversations and get a better understanding. But yeah, that's the mind shift changes. It's not just about the logged in patient or visitor. It's about anonymous visitors to your healthcare website, or if you have any kind of product as well.
Yeah, yeah, and I agree. There was, especially in the beginning, but even still, I think, there's, as with any of these, I went through the whole GDPR, rolling out now many years ago, but a lot of confusion, a lot of misinterpretation, or just, you know, when it's not explicitly stated, what do we do, and stuff. So, a lot of organizations' first reactions may have been to, okay, let's just shut down everything. Let's throw out Google Analytics because we're going to get in trouble. From your perspective, like, obviously that's not the right approach, but how can organizations keep using some of these tools that they've been relying on while maintaining their compliance?
Yeah, I think the first step is kind of like figuring out like the tool itself and what your concern should be. So I'm going to oversimplify this, Greg, because we don't have enough time to go like super
Right.
deep here. But you really need to get your legal and compliance team. You need to get IT involved. If you have some third party that can help you with auditing, you really need to first do an audit of your entire website, all the pages, all the subdomains, and you need to see what are all the web trackers, what are all the tools that you have hanging off your website. And you're basically going to come to an endpoint, which is you're going to have a bunch of tools with, let's call them web trackers, that are sending data that may contain PHI, but it's to a tool where you have the legal framework in place. We call it a business associate agreement, where it's okay to do that. What are some of those tools? A data warehouse, a CRM. I know you do a lot, Greg, with personalization and segmentation. So there's probably going to be some personalization tools you'll have a BA with. Those are okay. Just make sure you have up-to-date BAs, and those are all in a good place. But then you're going to ultimately end up with a bunch of tools. Call it the entire ad ecosystem or the entire Google suite of tools, Google Analytics, all the direct response ads, programmatic advertising, even some of the tools like video and Google Fonts that you just have running on your website for an experience. Those are all tools that also may be receiving PHI, but do not have a BAA, do not have the legal framework in place. So then, therefore, it's not okay to continue using those tools the way you are today. And that's the main bucket of tools that you're going to have to do something about in order to like continue to do it safely.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think along those lines, and maybe you're thinking along this as well. It sounds to me like a first step then, and maybe some orgs have already done this, but a first step is really just to do an audit of if font embedding is a potential issue, or some of these other things, just like getting an audit done so we actually know what the lay of the land is, so that we can then dive in a little deeper and figure out, okay, well, what actually does put us at risk, or things like that. Is that true?
You nailed it. Yeah, because look, you may have what, like, this isn't like a one step like do this and fix everything. This is
Right.
first, you may have a bunch of web trackers that are not even on pages where PHI exists. So, this is why you need a team. You need to talk to legal and compliance and make sure you fully understand, but it may not be a concern. And then for sure, there's a whole bunch of tools that you're using that the legal framework, it's either already in place or those vendors are willing to sign this business associate agreement to make those tools safe. And frankly, some of those tools, like you can't use a CRM to send segmented email without having PHI. Like you're going to have their
Right.
email, their name. You're going to have some context about where they are in their care journey. So you have to get a BAA. So yeah, it's really understanding first, like, are you sharing PHI with these tools? Is it okay to share PHI with these tools? And then for the ones that it's not okay, that's kind of the next step in the journey is what do you do? Do you abandon those tools? Do you replace them? Or are there ways to like make them work effectively while also keeping, our privacy concerns top of mind?
Before we continue, I'd like to introduce you to a sponsor of the show, Partner Hero. Customer service outsourcing has long been available mainly to large enterprise businesses with long-term contracts and onerous procurement processes. Partner Hero is challenging business as usual and bringing the benefits of outsourcing to small and medium businesses as well as startups. With short, flexible contracts and fast ramp-up times, Partner Hero is making customer support outsourcing a viable option for small and medium businesses and startups. It's perfect for companies with seasonality expecting a temporary spike in volume or that simply need to scale up. And their focus on quality means your customers will get an experience that feels like it comes from your team. If you're ready to bring in outside customer support help for your company that feels like it's part of your existing team, check out Partner Hero. Head on over to partnerhero.com/agile, that's partnerhero.com/AGILE, to book a free consultation with their solutions team. Mention you heard about Partner Hero from the Agile brand and they'll waive the setup fee. Now let's get back to the show.
And so I want to talk about the different types of data as well. So, we'll talk about third-party data in a second here, but, to talk about first-party, I mean, a lot of marketers have been through some of this already with, whether it's, if they deal in the EU GDPR or, even here in the States, California, some other states have some regulations and just the growing desire for greater consumer data privacy in general. But, how does something like this affect how an organization looks at specifically the first party data that they have?
Yeah, I mean, the first party data isn't the data that there's going to be a lot of changes I think we're all going to experience over the next few years. Like Google is eventually going to kill the third party cookie.
Right.
That's inevitable. That's going to happen. And the beautiful part is that doesn't involve first party data. First party data is the data about your visitors, about your patients that visit your website or are going through a journey through your organization. And I think being a marketer, and all the healthcare marketers I've worked with, we're all just trying to improve the experience for people. We're trying to use that first party data in a way to serve better advertising so that we can help them discover things that are beneficial to their quality of life. And then once they're in the journey, once they become, either patients or they've scheduled an appointment, how do we use that first party data to just continue to improve the experience? The reality is yeah, we have to think about privacy. And Greg, you and I talked about this a bit. We have to think about privacy, but we're in a world now where these high growth companies like the Ubers of the world and Instacart, all these things that make our lives convenient, have gotten so good at personalizing things and making it just in time for us that we also want the same thing from our healthcare experience. So that first party data is critical. And the good news is there are plenty of ways that we can continue to use that first party data to have the best experience possible through our brand while also doing privacy. This is not a zero sum game. This isn't, I can only do privacy or I can only have the best experience and the best marketing strategy. You actually, there are plenty of ways, and we believe that the regulators left these openings for us on purpose. There are plenty of ways to do both very successfully.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely one of the key things that people listening to this should take from this is that, yes, it's not that you have to sacrifice things. And to your point about the Ubers and Instacarts, it's those are cases where a customer gives a set of information to to an app, to a company, whatever, and they do it because they know they get better results the more that they give them, right? They get more personalized recommendations, they get more timely recommendations. So I definitely think, as much as we hear about consumers wanting their data kept private, which they do, they also, to what you just said, they also want what they want when they want when they want it, where, when, and how. So all of those things, I think, require them, and people are smart enough to know this, they've got to give that information in order to get personalized service, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, we just have to do it in a way. And I think the thing to think about, because we're consumers as well, when if you run an ad campaign, where are you going to reach your consumers? If you're doing consumer marketing, like in healthcare, you're going to reach them on the web. They're searching for ways out of an ailment, or looking for a treatment, or looking for a better quality of life. They're using these consumer facing advertising tools. So this whole ecosystem of Google ads and Facebook ads, I think we've made it, we've kind of villainized it, but it's actually, if it's done right, it's actually a good thing, because it makes it easier for consumers to discover ways that are going to improve their quality of life. So is it a good thing if we abandon those platforms that are where consumers live, and then that consumer doesn't have the ability to discover these things? I don't think it is. And I think we've gotten to a place where we feel that, I just can't use these tools or these platforms anymore. And that's why, if a company like Freshpaint, that's why we exist, because we believe that there are ways that you can actually you can have your cake and eat it too. You can create great experience, and you can help consumers discover your services as a healthcare organization, and you can guarantee that their privacy is being protected.
Yeah, and I think that's where, I know when we did a webinar a few weeks ago, one of the things that I was saying was, you get in these highly regulated industries. I work a bunch in financial services as well, but healthcare specifically, you have this kind of compliance driven mindset. And it goes to exactly what you just said, which is, okay, there's a problem, let's just stop everything. And okay, we can't do that anymore. Well, that's not the way to do it, right? If you're patient focused and outcomes focused, then there are ways to do this. It's not, sometimes it's not quite as easy as it used to be. Sometimes there are tools, Freshpaint is certainly one of them. Sometimes there are tools that allow you to do this very effectively, and it's not more difficult, it's just different. And that, I think that kind of speaks to the mindset shift thing that you had mentioned early. How would you characterize the mindset shifts, and just how do teams successfully make this leap from pre-December of last year to now, in other words?
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming by now many people, and if you haven't, there's no reason to wait. You should work with
Right.
the IT department and legal to just get an understanding of what's happening on your website, so there are no surprises. But let's just assume a lot of people have gone through this process and have gotten to the place that I've described, which is you have a bunch of tools that it's perfectly fine, given the legal framework you've put in place, to share PHI with. If you're using Salesforce or their marketing automation, then yeah, they sign a BAA, and you're going to send a lot of data to that tool to help that patient through the journey, reminders of appointments and all that. So that's great. And then you're going to end up with, like I mentioned before, a bunch of tools that are not going to be compliant, probably ever. If you're waiting around for Google ads or Facebook ads to sign a similar BAA like Salesforce would for their CRM, you're probably going to be retired from marketing by the time
Right.
it happens. It's not going to, and there's too much to unpack there to get into why today, but trust me, they're not going to. So then I think it's the mind shift change is accepting that you have to take a privacy first approach to your healthcare marketing, right? Basically stepping back a second and saying, okay, well, if I have to think of patient privacy first, then I have to make sure I have the BAAs in place where I need to. And then for those tools that are not compliant, I need to find a way or use a tool that will make sure that those tools never receive PHI. You basically need to get to a place where you gain a lot more control over what data travels from your website about that visitor downstream to that tool. So as an example, if you're using Google Analytics today, it's not a bad thing that you're using Google Analytics. The bad thing that the regulators have called out is that the web tracker that you have to load onto your website to make Google Analytics work is capturing pretty much everything it can about your visitor. And in that capture, it's sharing PHI, it's sharing the identifiers, like an IP address. It basically can share enough information that Google downstream can know who the visitor was, even if you don't. And then it's sharing the context about pages visited, buttons clicked, videos watched. All this may contain health information, context about what they're looking for. So that visitor, as simple as visiting your pregnancy services page, if you have that on your site, and then sharing that data directly to Google Analytics, is basically doing the violation that the regulators have called out at sharing PHI. And so you just need to do a couple things. You need to remove all those native trackers. So those native trackers, you don't have a lot of control over what they're capturing. And number two is they're like a signpost to not only the regulators, but the lawyers that are out there looking to open class action lawsuits. So as long as you have these web trackers like Google Analytics and the Meta Tracker and the Pixel and Google Ads, those are signposts to invite people to dig deeper. So you got to remove those for both pieces to have more control of the data and to make sure that there's just no signpost inviting, probing on your website. And then you need some way in the middle to be able to regulate that data. So you need a safe tracker that can collect data in a BA supported platform, and it needs the right tooling in place to make sure that the data that it shares to something like Google Analytics doesn't share PHI, just shares exactly what's needed, but doesn't share all the elements of PHI. In the Google Analytics case, that one's pretty easy. Google Analytics doesn't need identifiers like IP address. It just needs to know about what pages were visited, what buttons were clicked, when did something convert, how much time was on page. You can do all of that without sharing identifiers and letting people know the visitor was Ray or the visitor was Greg. So there are ways that you can do it, but it definitely starts with taking this privacy first mindset. And it definitely starts with removing the native tracking tech. That is exactly what the regulators have called out in their guidance, Greg.
Yeah, and I think maybe here would be a good, if you don't mind just briefly explaining. I think you've kind of touched on how Freshpaint works, but I think it might help for those that aren't familiar, or maybe they're using an alternative or something. If you could just at a very high level, so how does something like Freshpaint work as opposed to Google Analytics, or with Google Analytics, I guess might be more accurate.
Yeah. So if let's say you're like most healthcare organizations and let's say you've got Google Analytics, you've got embedded YouTube video players on your site where you're hosting videos on YouTube and allowing patients to get like a richer experience. Let's say you're using Google Ads, let's say you're using Facebook ads. So what you would do with something like Freshpaint is you would just remove, as I mentioned before, you would remove all those native web trackers. You wouldn't have the Metapixel. You wouldn't use the trackers for Google. You've basically removed those. So if someone looked at your site, they don't see any of those trackers anymore because they're no longer there. And what this does is it makes sure that those tools, those advertising and analytics tools that won't sign BAAs, no longer have access to data from your website. And so Freshpaint would be a platform that you would implement, and we sign a BAA with every one of our healthcare customers so we can safely collect the data. And we give you a JavaScript snippet, another web tracker that you would put on your site to replace all those others. So again, I want to make sure it's clear. None of the other web trackers exist anymore. Only Freshpaint is there. And Freshpaint is collecting the data and sending that data to a BAA supported platform. So it's safe for you to share data to Freshpaint. And then the secret here is that we then create a layer where for even a marketer who isn't an engineer can go through a visual interface and choose which data is safe to send to those tools downstream. So in the Google Analytics case, you would never opt in to send something like IP address or device ID because HIPAA would call those identifiers. Right. And you don't want to share that with Google because Google Analytics is going to have health information. For a tool like YouTube, it would be the same. Like you wouldn't want to share the IP address. And for the ad platforms, you would want to restrict to only a few pieces of data that make those ad platforms work successfully. So Freshpaint basically replaces all of those native trackers that are not safe, and then additionally gives you these layers of managing the data that flows from your website to those downstream tools. And it allows you to use those tools as effectively as you're using them today, but now not worrying or having concerns about PHI being shared with them.
Yeah. And that kind of brings me to thanks for that explanation. Just kind of thinking, last thing I wanted to talk about was kind of the operational side of this. And, I mentioned this, when organizations are compliance first, they often lose sight of the patient or of even marketing and things like that. And so, using the right tooling and thinking about all this stuff is what I would call compliance by design, which, in other words, in my mind, what that means is it's built in from the start, and therefore, you can use the tools that you need. You don't have to use specific tools. You can use the ones that work for you. And then you can focus on the patient. You can focus on marketing and all of these other things. And so, I wonder, since we are a few months in here, obviously it's all been almost a year since the announcement was made. I'm sure a lot of healthcare organizations are addressing this in some way, maybe not in the best way, but what does this compliance by design allow organizations to then focus on, instead of, again, just thinking, okay, are we checking the boxes?
Yeah, I love this, Greg. And this is when I was thinking of taking this privacy first approach, you and I are saying the same thing.
Right.
By design, let's actually first address compliance and making sure that we're safeguarding patient data. And I would say early on, I didn't know enough to say this. I just knew that there were ways to be able to do this. But I can just tell you anecdotally from, we've worked with 100 healthcare organizations by now. I can tell you anecdotally that when people start thinking about it in this way, it unlocks a lot of new opportunities for them, because in the past, it's been really difficult. There's a bunch of tooling that's in place within healthcare marketing, CRM, marketing automation tools, that it's really difficult for those healthcare marketers to get the data set to those tools that they need to run them successfully, because they have to keep going back to some kind of IT or engineering resource to say, I need these new events, or I need this new data fed to these tools. And it's not sustainable because they just don't have the dedicated resources. Like it or not, a lot of traditional healthcare organizations do not have the brute force engineering teams that we have in high growth markets, the Ubers and the Lyfts of the world. They have dedicated teams that they literally spend their whole life optimizing and personalizing and getting the data you need. And so this compliance by design approach has actually unlocked for a lot of organizations, because the tooling they would have to put in place, whether it's Freshpaint or not, the tooling that they would have to put in place to solve for this also gives them the possibility of being able to feed even the tools where they have a BAA in place. So more easily freeing them up to get the data they need to make those tools work even more effectively. We've also heard that in the past, you would never be able to install Google Analytics on certain pages at all, because those visitors, even in that old Mindshift setting, they were in a logged in state. They were a known user, and no one in healthcare would ever install Google Analytics on those pages, beyond the paywall, basically.
Right.
And now with taking a compliance by design, privacy first approach, people are able to actually track even more across the property because there is no PHI ever being shared. So we've talked to marketers who have gone from fighting really hard to just even get a baseline understanding of what the user journey is, to having much deeper user journey further through the funnel, just simply by being able to track more things safely. So it's kind of viewed right now, I could see it. Oh my gosh, this is going to be my Achilles heel for the rest of my marketing career in healthcare, to wait a second, now that we're on the other side of this, there's just so much more we can do that we were never able to, but always wanted to. So I've been really inspired by seeing those possibilities.
Yeah. No, that's great. Well, Ray, thanks so much for joining the show. One last question before we wrap up. So, as we mentioned, probably most healthcare organizations or organizations affected by HIPAA, they've made some progress towards these goals. So, acknowledging that, but kind of going back to the, privacy first, compliance by design aspect, for those organizations that, yes, maybe they're addressing some things, but their mindset hasn't quite shifted yet. What would your advice be to them to take a best next step towards that?
Yeah, I think everyone that I've talked to, whether it's chief compliance officer, senior general counsel of market, I think the first step is just making sure you have the right people in the room. Make sure that you're building, because this is not something that's going to go away. Consumer privacy, even outside of healthcare, is growing. It's something that in politics, it's on both sides of the aisle, it's a concern. So it's a best practice right now, especially if you're in healthcare, get that right team together, start having these conversations, make sure you understand what's on your website, make sure you understand like where the data is going. We've written a lot about this. We've I think you were going to link to something in the show notes. We wrote a blog post kind of like about this framework of like all the way from audit to govern to monitor. So, we've written a lot about this topic, but I think it really starts with getting that team together and start having this conversation and make sure that you like really understand what's going on across your website, and make sure you understand what your legal team, cares about as well.
Yeah, that's great. Well, again, I'd like to thank Ray Mina, head of marketing at Freshpaint, for joining the show. You can learn more about Ray and Freshpaint and get a link to the blog post that Ray mentioned by following the links in the show notes.
Thanks again for listening to the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can access more episodes of the show at www.gregkihlstrom.com. That's GREGKIHLSTROM.com. To get a copy of my latest book, House of the Customer, visit my website, or you can find it on Amazon or other retailers. The Agile Brand is produced by Missing Link, a Latina-owned, strategy-driven, creatively fueled production co-op. From ideation to creation, they craft human connections through intelligent, engaging, and informative content. Until next time, stay agile.